Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in Waynesville, North Carolina. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. I want to share with you today a little bit about the chart of Bitcoin. Bitcoin's a phenomenon that's in the news a lot this year. And one of my members recently requested that I help them understand that chart a little bit more in order to time their investments. And in the process, I guess you would say I got bit by the crypto bug. It's really fascinating. And so I thought it would be an interesting thing. And even if you're not into Bitcoin or crypto, I think that this chart is very interesting, and it might serve as a teaching tool for how I read charts and how charts can be read in what I would sort of call, I guess, a neoclassical fashion. So I want to start out and just give like sort of the broad overview of the chart, and then we're going to dive into bits and pieces of it, identify the most important bits and pieces, and maybe break out and do additional videos to dive deeper into those sections. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and pull up the chart here. The chart for Bitcoin itself, you know, astrology has come a long way in the last 50 years or so with respect to the way that we handle data. A lot of that was due to a lady by the name of Lois Rodden, who instituted a system for rating the quality of birth data. It's called the Rodden rating system. And then she started a company called Astro Data Bank, which had a wonderful software that had like tens of thousands of charts, and you could do research based on it and stuff. And then I guess the people at astro.com bought that. So now if you want to Google any celebrity's name with the words Astro Data Bank following them, you can find the charts for all kinds of celebrities, which is really cool. But when we look at the chart for Bitcoin, this is not a person. So we don't have the traditional, birth records and so on that we might have otherwise. What we do have is the actual record. It's called a Genesis block. Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency that is it's part of a blockchain technology, and so there's a chain of blocks of information. Blocks of information are linked together in a chain, right? The very first block is called the Genesis block, and that block contains a timestamp because the founder, parentheses, founders, Satoshi Nakamoto may or may not have been a single person, right? And probably wasn't their real name. But in any event, the founders designed the cryptography in such a way that there's a stamp with the date and time on each block. So we know the date and time. It's 6:15 p.m. UTC, January 3rd, 2009. Now the place is very interesting because the place is also embedded in the code of the Genesis block. It contains a headline from a newspaper for the day. And that's interesting because a lot of people speculate that what Nakamoto was doing there is proving that, hey, this really was the first block and it was mined on this day. I didn't pre-mine a whole bunch of stuff and then stick it in there later to kind of give myself a head start, right? I don't know if that makes any sense. But at any rate, there's a few reasons for sticking that headline in there. And it's a headline from the London Times talking about the chancellor is about to do another round of bailouts for the banks. So that's very interesting with respect to the nature of what Bitcoin is, the nature of the mission of Bitcoin, and the nature of where in the world do we locate this chart? Well, London is the place that is embedded in the blockchain itself. So we have January 3rd, 2009, 6:15 p.m. in London. Now, if all that seems a little esoteric for you and you're like, yeah, I'm with you for a while, I don't even know if, like, how could that chart work? Like, that doesn't follow the rules. Like, that's not data that I'm comfortable working with. We don't even have a way, even the rod and rating system, there's no box to even rate that data. Like, what? The date and time seem good, but the place, like, what, from a newspaper headline? So the way that I decided to deal with that is like, okay, let's treat it as if it's a rectified chart. That a rectified chart is when any of the data is questionable, what astrologers can do is they say, hey, okay, look, we don't really know the time. So, or sometimes even the date is in question. And in that case, what we do is we kind of reverse engineer. So we ask the client, well, I like to get a picture of the client because the actual appearance of the client has something to do with the ascendant of the chart. And I also ask them a list of, to tell me, like, a list of really important life events. And then from those events, we can say, okay, given this date, I also ask for the narrative, the family narrative, and that they've inherited from, the last time I did one, I think the guy told me his father was on the roof of the barn, fixing the roof of the barn. And when he was told he had a son, he nearly fell off. Well, right away, we know that that's a diurnal birth. It's daytime, right? The father's not going to be out on the roof of the barn in the middle of the night. So we know, so that right away, you see it can narrow it down. And so we begin to take the events and we reverse engineer the chart to where we say, hey, look, I don't know that you were born at this time, but what I do know is that this chart works and it responds to transits. And so if you use this chart with an astrologer, and any astrologer that works with transits and will be able to say, hey, something is liable to happen around this time or that time or the other time. It's a functional chart. We can't say with any certainty that you were actually born at that time, but we can say that the chart works. And ultimately, that's really where we wind up with Bitcoin, is that this essentially, to me, is and so in that case, it would get a C rating in the Rodden system if it's a rectified chart. And I'm here to tell you, this chart works. I've tested it. I've tested it not just going back and looking at life events like I would with a client, but in live time, watching the transits as it hits the chart and watching the price action and so forth. This chart works. So with that said, let's dive into this chart and let's begin to look at it. Right. So for people who might not know very much at all about astrology, they might be looking at this chart and going, what the hell is all that anyways, And so, one thing that a lot of people are familiar with, anybody born around January 3rd, they would identify as a Capricorn, right? That would be their sun sign is Capricorn. And so most people, that would be their main, entry point into this complex map that I'm showing you here. But you'll notice that the glyph for the sun here and the glyph for Capricorn is in the lower half of the chart, and in fact the time here is 6:15 p.m. In January, the sun has already set, right? So here's the horizon line. Basically this red line here in the middle of the wheel, that represents the horizon line. So you can see the sun has already set some time ago, and it's nighttime. Now, in a nocturnal chart, the sect light, S-E-C-T, the light that is of the sect of the chart. Sect means essentially like, you hear about religious sects. It's a division of a religion. A sect is like it's like a particular division of another thing, right? So if we divide the chart into day or night, the sect light, the light that is of the nature of the chart, is the moon. See, the moon is the light of the night. And so, yes, the sun sign is Capricorn, but more importantly, the moon sign is Aries. Yeah. Aries moon. And we can say a lot of things about that. The first thing that a lot of people always say, oh, Aries moon warrior, it's like, yeah, there is that energy there. Aries is the first sign of spring. And so there's this rush of energy, and Aries is often, rushes headlong into things like a good warrior should. There should be no hesitation when it's time to fight. A warrior should rush headlong into battle, and throw themselves into it completely. Yes, that's true. But the archetype of Aries is much more complex than that. I like to share, with respect to Aries, I like to share a visual from a work that unfortunately never got finished. It's from my dear friend Kelly Lee Phipps' work in progress, The Tao of Astrology. I was so excited when he was working on this because he showed me some snapshots of what he was doing while he was doing it, and I was just like, man, this is going to be game changing. Because the first thing that when he showed me this graphic in particular, I was like, yes, finally we have some words for Aries beyond the warrior. Because I thought about joining the military only because being poor, growing up poor, that's one of the places that people go to get an education. But you know what? I had way too much of a drill sergeant for a father. And I was like, I don't think I could take any more of that kind of energy. So I think I'm going to skip that whole trip. And so, for me, when I was growing up, like, the pioneer was always the thing that I thought of with regard to Aries, of who I really wanted to be. Like, I read stories about Lewis and Clark when I was in first grade. I was like, holy smokes, like that, like going out into the wilderness and exploring something that nobody's ever, documented before. Certainly people were already living there and everything, but nobody's ever, documented it before. And the whole Star Trek, going places that have never been gone before and all that, that really appealed to me. And so I've always thought of Aries more as the pioneer or the trailblazer as much as anything. And you can see we have some other, the daredevil, the thrill seeker. Certainly people who get into crypto, there is that aspect of it. There's a thrill seeking that it's very volatile, and the highs are really high. The lows are pretty low too. They can be pretty scary. I mean, I've been studying this for a couple months now intensively. And so sometimes I'll be studying and I have on one screen, I have the chart and I'm looking at the chart and I'm studying. And on the other screen, I have the live feed of the prices, and what's going on, just tuning in. And all of a sudden you see like red, and it's in blood red, all the prices go red. And it's like, within 10 minutes, it's down 30. And you're going, oh my God, Black Tuesday, what is this? And then, boom, boom, it bounces. It's unbelievable. I can't, if you haven't experienced those kind of drops with skin in the game, like as an owner of some of this stuff, I mean, your heart just gets in your throat, and you're, oh my God, is this is this the apocalypse? So there's certainly that aspect to it. The hero and champion, right? for a lot of people, this is a way out of a system that does not work for them. Even straight white males like myself, I've never been able to stand working in an office or donning a suit and tie. And so even with all my privilege, that world has really I've never really been able to get much out of that world. And so, this technology makes available a lot of this, things that were not available to people who weren't willing to, go down that narrow path of going to a big city, commuting to a big city, going to an office building, working for a corporation, all that stuff. Like anybody who wasn't able to fall into that routine, this thing represents like a potential way. So it really is a hero kind of vision for a lot of people. That can be a good thing in that it gives them hope. It can be a bad thing because it blinds them to the reality of what's going on potentially. One of the things that I realized very quickly when I started watching this price is like, I was trying to figure out, okay, let's just, and I just made some really small bets, right? Let's test this. So I bet that it's going to go up, or I bet that it's going to go down, and then let's see what happens. Well, I realized right away, like, you betting that it's going to go up because you want it to go up, or right? So, and that like being, and then so like learning that sort of ruthlessness of a day trader of like, you know what? It doesn't freaking matter up or down. I have the tools to make money no matter which way it goes. That was actually I've never really been able to be that kind of person before. I always felt like that attitude was unhealthy. But for the first time, I realized there's a healthy distance that you can have from something where, I mean, it's sort of predatory, granted, but there's a very stark objectivity to it as well that can be purposeful, if not healthy. So anyway, the Aries moon is really important in this chart. And it's not just because the moon is the sextile, right? It's a nocturnal chart, the moon's in Aries. But the moon is also what we call the almutin of the figure. Now that's a very complex word. It's a Latinized version of a word. We're not even sure what word. Some people say almatine, some people say, but according to my friend Sam Reynolds, there is no actual word that would correspond to this. So it's hard to figure out exactly what the Latinized thing is. Some people say al-mubtaz, the winner, right? But essentially, so, we're just going to say right away that there's some cultural, translation that we, unfortunately, we don't really know exactly what that means. But we do know what functionally it was supposed to do. The almutin of the figure is supposed to be the planet that is ruling over the most important places in the chart. What I mean by the most important places, like for instance, this point over here, which is where the ascendant, this is the ascendant or rising sign. This is the place where the sky meets the earth, where the new sign and the new constellations are coming into view. Okay, so there's something rising up over the horizon, and then over here, something is setting. So we have a rising, a culminating, a setting, and my friend Gemini Bretz calls them rise, reach, rest, and root. Good words as well. The ascendant, the sun, and the moon, those are the big three in modern astrology. They are very important to the calculation of the almutin as well. The next thing is fortune. the lot of fortune, or the part of fortune, as the Arabics called it. Now, how we arrive to that is we take the sun-moon angle, which in this chart is 81 degrees and 3 minutes. This is a waxing crescent moon, hasn't quite reached first quarter. So we would apply the arc, the sun-moon arc, to the ascendant. And if we apply that in a downward fashion, essentially what we're doing then is we're putting the sun on the ascendant, and this point here would show us where the moon would be if we rotate the sun to the ascendant. And that would be at 29 Libra 53. So this is the lot of spirit. Sun, the sun is the represents the circle of spirit, right? And so when we put the sun on the ascendant, this would be the lot where the moon would be, and that would indicate the lot of spirit. The lot of fortune would be if we apply 81 degrees and 3 minutes going back this way, right? It's the mirror or inverse image. And that brings us to about 17 degrees and 47 minutes of Taurus. Unfortunately, this program, for all its obvious benefits in so many other areas, it doesn't have the ability to reverse that calculation. So I'll bring up a chart that has that in there just for visual purposes. So here is fortune in Taurus. What's interesting about that is, anybody that knows, you know, one of the reasons why it took me a while to get into cryptocurrency is that I just thought this whole idea, oh yeah, Uranus is going into Taurus, so cryptocurrency is going to, you know, become a thing. That's too simplistic. Like, it can't be that simple, man. Well, it actually has been. And so my bad. Like, yep, sometimes it's that simple, right? You know, it just like, it's not always, and most of the time it's not, but in this case. But I also think it's interesting that the lot of fortune is located in Taurus. And in fact, the planet Uranus is getting very close to this degree. It won't reach this degree until next year, actually, which is interesting. Now, fortune is the lot of the moon. If we rotate the moon around to be at the ascendant, we will find the sun located at 1747 of Taurus, okay? So fortune, now, the difference between spirit and fortune is, we'll get there in a second. Let's just leave it here with fortune for a second. I'm going to talk about some more about the nocturnal diurnal distinctions of this chart. And the other thing that we look at for the Almutin, so we have sun, moon, ascendant, we have fortune, and we have the syzygy, or the most recent lunation, the PNL, prenatal lunation. Since this chart is a waxing crescent moon, it would have been the previous new moon. Essentially, this is the most recent important mundane chart. And so we're going to stick that in there. For some people believe this is when the soul actually became, you know, staged, like right before birth. The soul maybe wasn't, you know, fully embodied yet. And this was the point where the soul, you know, okay, now it's, you know, this is kind of like where the, you know, if you're talking aeronautics, you know, this is when the rocket's on the launch pad, right? Like we're ready to go, like we could live or die from here, you know, kind of thing. So that's what some people say anyways. In this case, that is at 6 degrees of Capricorn. And so what we have here is we have the sun in Capricorn, we have the prenatal lunation in Capricorn, we have the fortune in Taurus. So we have 3 earth signs right away. So that tells you something. Earth, by the way, is the most dense of the 4 elements, right? Every child knows if you throw a rock in the water, it sinks. And if you heat water, it evaporates, right? So it becomes air. And then if you heat that, it becomes even more rarefied. So fire is the least dense of the 4 elements, right? And so earth, materiality, so forth. This is a chart of a thing that is about currency. Now, it's very interesting because we're going to talk about the difference between earth currency and air currency as we go along. But what's interesting is that if you understand the system of classical dignities, of which there are 5 basic levels, there are the rulerships of the signs, the exaltations, triplicities, bounds, and face or decan. Most people know the rulerships by sign. Some people mix the outer planets in there, which they wouldn't have done that in the system that I'm working from here. They didn't even know about the outer planets yet. So of course they wouldn't have. And most people who know about the old system know that when they did mix the new planets in there, they didn't do it in the same way that the original system. So it's kind of a hodgepodge. Not to say it doesn't work. I've seen people make really good use of it, but just so you know, it's 2 totally different things. It's a bit of a, I don't know what word, hodgepodge is a kind word actually. But anyways, when you have earth signs in a nocturnal chart, one of the main rulerships there by triplicity is the moon. So the moon rules the earth signs in a nocturnal chart. And because we have 3 different factors here of the 5, of the main 5 in earth signs, the moon becomes very important. The moon also is the exaltation ruler of Taurus. So that's where the moon gets all her points, from her triplicity rulership of Capricorn and her exaltation rulership of the earth, of exaltation rulership of Taurus, triplicity rulership of earth. Okay, so that's a little advanced, but it's important to understand here that the moon is important on a couple different levels. Now, one thing that we would say about that in a spiritual sense is that the daimon, or the guardian angel of this entity, it's not a person. So we're going to say entity, being, thought form, whatever you want to call it. I mean, blockchain is what it is, right? The guardian angel of this comes from the sphere of the moon. It's a lunar, you see? And so this thing has come here to be lunar and to spread lunar wisdom, and the angel that is in charge of making sure that it fulfills its destiny is lunar in nature, you see? So propitiating lunar things would be very powerful, but also there's the powerful side of the lunar, which again, I mean, nocturnal, right? I mean, think about this for a second. Look at the picture that I'm using for a background, right? This is a picture of the sky, and nocturnal, right? It's so in a daytime sky, you see one star, the sun. There's nothing, you can't see any. You might see the moon, but she's not a star. You can actually sometimes see Venus in the daytime if you know exactly where to look and it's exactly the right time. But you don't see much else, right? So there's this, which is interesting because, this whole concept of decentralization, notice that the sign on the ascendant is Leo. Leo is the sign of centralized authority, the king, or the chieftain, or, human beings have oriented themselves in that sort of fashion ever since we've been, organizing ourselves, and, for as far back as history goes, as so far as we know, central authority has always been the way that we've organized. So this whole concept of decentralization is very interesting because notice that what the moon is the light that allows all the other stars to shine. It's decentralized by its nature. A nocturnal chart is decentralized in that you can see all the other lights. There's not this central thing that's shining that blots out everything else, that demands to be respected, right? There's a softness, there's a freedom. You can move about at night without the danger of becoming dehydrated or burned up like you would with the sun and so forth, right? So it's very interesting right away in that regard, with the moon being the Almuten. If you know anything about the Kabbalah, the downside of the moon being the Almuten is, the moon is the closest sphere to the earth. So in the ancient system, you have the earth and then you have 7 heavens, right? And these are in the Chaldean order. So the fastest planet, the moon, is in the sphere right next to the earth. And we have Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, right? So being the sphere closest to the earth, the moon is involved in materialization. But the moon is also a planet that is famous for being about illusions and emotional reactions to things, which can be very beautiful and flowing. It can be really good to allow that part of ourselves to inform our life. Being in tune with the rhythms of nature and the rhythms of the animals and the earth around you, for instance, like living on a farm. I love that aspect of life. But being overly emotional to the point of like, being hysterical or, oversensitized to things. Like I said, do I think the price of Bitcoin is going up because I want it to go up, or because that's what the data is telling me? You see, the sphere in Kabbalah, the sphere of the moon is called Yesod, and it's the beauty of Yesod is that it's power of imagination. It's sort of astral energy. Like on the astral plane, you're free somewhat from the limitations of matter, and you can imagine things that aren't actually possible in physical form, right? In your dreams, you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. But it's important to be able to distinguish a dream from reality, because if you go acting as if you're in a dream, you're going to be punished by the laws of the actual, physical universe, you see? So that's sort of the downside of having a chart that is where the moon is. So it's really interesting, in that regard, like when you read some of these forecasts, that it's really interesting to see, there's a lot, there's FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And they're like, oh, don't be influenced by the FUD, keep a positive attitude and stuff like that. And that's also a thing about the moon, right? The moon is very fluid, very easily influenced. Your emotional state it's very susceptible to, to the emotional state of the people you surround yourself with, and the emotional state of the larger information that you allow into your consciousness. Yes. So if you're around negative people and negative information, your emotional field is going to be saturated with negativity. You're just going to create more negativity. That's the law of attraction. And so, not to say that, if you're depressed and, because your life is hard, that it's your fault. I'm not victim blaming here. I'm just saying that, it's important, for instance, when you're depressed, to understand that you need to pull back from anything that's going to make you more depressed, right? You're already depressed. You need to you need to be able to have a healthy limits on anything else that's going to, and find your safe place where you can rebuild, some confidence and some, and get yourself back together and so forth, right? So there's a positive and a negative to this idea of being ruled by the moon. Now, the other thing about being a night chart is that when we divide the chart into a nocturnal or diurnal thing, we can also divide the rest of the planets into two teams. The moon is the light that is of the nature of night, right? Well, the Venus is the benefic that is of the feminine or nocturnal nature, right? Venus, very obviously. So the moon and Venus are part of the nocturnal team, right? Now, the malefic that goes with the nocturnal team is Mars. And it's not because Mars is naturally nocturnal. Mars is not. Mars is fiery and very hot and dry. That's why we put him with the nocturnal crew, to chill him out, to try to keep him from being so troublesome, you know. And so right away, here's evidence of magical organization, because right away, we are not accepting things as we are. This is not stoic. We're not accepting things as they are. We're not accepting Mars. We're saying, Mars, we're going to make an adjustment. We're going to, put you over here, and so to try to counterbalance your nature, actually, you see. So this is not stoic at all. This is actually evidence of magical organization, very much embedded even in the Hellenistic times, in my opinion. And so the three planets that are associated with the nocturnal sect are the moon, Venus, and Mars. And in this chart, all of them are dignified. Venus is dignified by exaltation. Venus takes her exaltation in Pisces. Mars takes his exaltation in Capricorn, so Mars is also exalted. They're also in a sextile. So that's really interesting, because these two exalted planets have an aspect, which is even better, and it's a helpful aspect. The sextile is of the nature of either Venus or Mercury, because in the Thema Mundi, the sextile would be reflected by the fact that, for instance, the rulership of the moon in Cancer is the Mercury in Virgo is sextile to the rulership of moon in Cancer, and or the rulership of Venus in Libra is sextile to the rulership of the sun in Leo. The Thema Mundi derives the nature of the aspects from the relationship of the planets and their domiciles back to the lights, you see. Now, let's see. Now, in a day chart, Venus would have triplicity dignity in Capricorn, but she does not. So there's not any, but in a night chart, Mars has triplicity dignity in water signs. So this is a sextile with reception. And what that means is that Venus is in a sign in which Mars has some say-so. Mars is the triplicity ruler of the water signs in a nocturnal chart. And by the way, if you're wondering about all this stuff, here's the key. It's rather involved. This first level, we have this is a whole class. This is a whole series of classes, really. So forgive me, but you'll see the domicile rulerships in the first ring. The exaltation rulerships are in the second ring. The triplicity rulerships are in the third ring. And so in a nocturnal chart, you'll notice that the water signs are ruled by three planets, the nocturnal planets. Venus in a day sign, Mars at night, Moon right? And so the Earth signs are ruled by the same three planets, right? So what this is telling you is that if the nocturnal team is the Moon, Venus, and Mars, they're ruling by triplicity, they're ruling the nocturnal signs, the feminine, water, and earth signs, you see? So what they're saying is that the nature of the planet matches the nature of the sign. That's what triplicity dignity is. You see? And so if we go back to Venus in Pisces, see Mars is the nocturnal ruler of Pisces. And so that means that Mars is one of the rulers of Venus here. So Venus is moving into a sign and she's in aspect to one of her rulers. So this is what reception is. Reception means that Venus is, imagine that Pisces is a house. It's a domicile, right? It's a territory. It's a country, maybe even. Venus is entering a country and she has a relationship with one of the rulers of that country, a helpful relationship. So Venus, so what would that look like? The ruler would say, welcome to my kingdom, welcome to my home. Let me make sure that you feel at home, right? This is what people do. This is the way society works. I've been very fortunate. I've been all around my country and indeed the world, invited into people's homes, and they invariably, I mean, this is a rule, you know, of culture going way back, right? And so the planet, the ruler, the owner of the sign says, let me make you comfortable, make yourself at home, right? So Venus is being welcomed or received into, so there's a very powerful relationship here for the nocturnal planets. They are in a nocturnal chart. They're in a chart that is of their nature. They're in signs that where they exalt, they are in their highest expression, and they have a positive helpful relationship between one another. The same thing is true also with the moon and Mars. Now you say, well, Gary, now the square is not a helpful or positive relationship. Well, it's true. The square is of the nature of Mars because in the Thema Mundi, Mars in Scorpio squares the sun in Leo. And so what does that mean? The square is hot and dry. It separates. So it can be hard. It says, make a freaking choice, this or that. You can't have both, this or that, and let's go. Or, you know, just do something already, right? You know, quit sitting around waiting and just do something. These are typically the way that squares get activated. You'll be forced to make a choice or forced to take some action, even though you really would rather not, maybe sometimes, right? Especially if you're a trine person. But notice that the moon is in a sign ruled by Mars, right? And Mars is in a sign somewhat ruled by the moon. Remember, moon is the triplicity ruler of earth signs in a nocturnal chart. So they are welcoming each other. This is mutual reception. The moon is applying to an aspect with Mars. She rules the sign Mars is in, and Mars rules the sign she's in. This is mutual reception. This is very much, now, there's a tense aspect. Yes, there's an edginess to the agenda of this team, this nocturnal team. They want to make a very clear and hard distinction between what they are about and what something else is about, right? But as far as the way the team gets along, that is very much mitigated by the fact that there's this mutual reception. The moon being received, this moon is not afflicted in any way that I would not refer to this moon as afflicted. So all three members of this nocturnal sect have some dignity. Venus and Mars have dignity of their own. The moon is receiving some of Mars's dignity through her reception with Mars. That's the way that I see it. And again, don't ask me to quote chapter and verse because I'm not a chapter and verse kind of guy. So you know, it's just I've done all the reading, and this is my particular take on it. And so that's that is what it is. If you can't find it in a book somewhere, doesn't mean it's not necessarily true. All right, so now the team that would represent the contrary team in this chart would be Jupiter, Saturn, and the Sun. This is the team of the diurnal sect. So basically the moon in political terms, and I really don't want to get political, but I'm just going to talk in terms of the mechanics of politics to give a metaphor. The moon, Venus, and Mars would be akin to the party in power. Whatever party is currently the dominant party, holds the most seats, whatever, they're running the agenda. That is the nocturnal sect in this chart. The party out of power, which back in the day, my understanding, their responsibility was to kind of keep a check on the party in power, make sure they didn't get too carried away with their agenda. That would be the Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn. Now, in all three of these planets, none of them have much dignity. None of them have any essential dignity. The Sun has no essential dignity in Capricorn, except in the third decan. The Sun rules the third decan of Capricorn, but we're not there yet. Jupiter has no essential dignity in Capricorn except for the first decan, and he's in the third. Jupiter rules the bounds between 7 and 14, the Egyptian bounds, and Jupiter's way past that. So Jupiter has no essential dignity. In fact, Jupiter is in its fall. It is opposite the sign of its exaltation. So if anything, Jupiter has negative dignity, which means Jupiter is kind of like the stranger in a strange land. It's as far away from its happy place as it can get. So it's kind of like the foreign person who, I remember when I traveled to Iceland, how when you rent a car, you're supposed to fill it up with gas so they don't gouge you but they make it impossible not to get gouged because, the gas station that's right by the airport, conveniently, my wife and I had 4 credit cards between us. It didn't take any of them. So it's like, yeah, you're going to get gouged. You're in a foreign country. That's it's like a tourist trap. Like, that's just the way it is. You get gouged and, what are you going to do? So, that's kind of the situation that Jupiter's in this chart. The Sun would be more what they call, there's a term for it, I'm not thinking of it right. He's just a wanderer. It's not that he is sort of like, stranger in a strange land. He doesn't belong there, but he doesn't not belong there either, essentially. Same thing with Saturn. Saturn has no problems in Virgo per se. Saturn rules the very last 2 degrees of Virgo by bounds. So there's no happy place for Saturn in Virgo except for there, which is interesting because you think of Saturn as kind of earthy. So I don't know that Saturn's really in a bad way here, but it's not in his happy place at all. And so really this team, it doesn't have a lot of power to put checks on the agenda of and it's interesting, it's like, here we are, this is the 3rd bull run of Bitcoin, and it's only now that it's being taken seriously enough that the dominant, powers that be are talking about, oh, wow, we need to regulate this stuff, right? Because I think they were hoping that it would just go away. It's kind of smart, usually, from a Taoist perspective, Wu Wei, or however you say that, Nanadu, most of the time, the best thing to do is nothing, until something really needs to be done. And now, oh boy, now something needs to be done. That's actually a good sign. It means that they're taking it seriously, and so now it's a little bit too little too late in my estimation. they probably wish they would have squashed this early on. It's funny because the Tao also says, attend to things, attend to small beginnings. So on the one hand, it says, yeah, don't bother with stuff, don't fix it if it ain't broke, kind of thing. But on the other hand, it says, attend to small beginnings. And I bet you they wish they had squashed this before. I mean, you're talking about Bitcoin at this point has 700,000 blocks in the chain. That's a lot of blocks. And it's on its third bull run. I don't think it's going anywhere. And so now they're going to have to regulate it. And it's one more thing that they're going to have to deal with, and, yada, yada. So it's really interesting. Now, you're saying, Gary, you missed a planet, and it's your favorite planet. What are you doing here, man? Mercury. Which team is Mercury on? Well, it depends on whether Mercury is in its morning star manifestation or its evening star manifestation. Mercury is the sublime it, they, we planet. Like, it could go either way, always. It can play on with either team. And so it depends on now. Mercury is in its evening star manifestation. How do we know that? Mercury is further ahead in the zodiac than the sun. And so what that means is that when the sun rises, Mercury is already above the sun, and it's only after the sun sets that you see Mercury in the evening, right? So we can do two things. We can rotate the chart, or we can just say, well, Mercury's ahead of the sun in the zodiac, so it's evening star. Therefore, Mercury is on the side with the nocturnal sect. And Mercury has also triplicity dignity in this chart. Mercury has triplicity dignity in air signs. Mercury is very much down with the nature of air. Yeah, absolutely. Mercury also has bounds dignity. Mercury rules the first 6 degrees of Aquarius by bounds. Again, if we go back to this essential dignity chart, you can see that here. Notice that Mercury has the N next to it in this third wheel. And then Mercury from 0 to 7 here rules those bounds. Bounds is kind of like, it's like Saturn is the principal of the school of Aquarius, right? Mercury rules this particular classroom from 0 to 6 degrees. So Mercury's in its own classroom. So Mercury's going to say, hey, you know what? We're in a Saturn classroom, right? So we got to we're not going to get away with too much because we're in a Saturn school rather. But in my classroom, we're going to be a little more fluid than that. We're not going to be super rigid. And so we're going to adjust the agenda a little bit because we're in, and when the principal comes by, maybe we just need to smile and wave and do as Romans do. But other than that, y'all can relax a little bit, kind of thing, right? That's the beauty of when you're within the domain of a malefic. In this case, the out of sect malefic. That means the malefic that is contrary to the sect of the chart, which is scary territory potentially. If you're in the bounds of a benefic or a neutral planet, Mercury, I think you can class Mercury as a benefic. I don't think Mercury really is harmful. Mercury can be trickster-ish, but most of the time the trickster kind of stuff is for your own good if you're smart enough to get the joke. You see? So I would put Mercury as a benefic personally, but I understand if people want to put it in the middle somewhere. But once again, the nocturnal sect in this chart is pretty powerful. They can pretty much do what they want, and there's not a lot that the nocturnal team can do about it. And so, that kind of says something, So there's a big question right now, is Bitcoin, is it real? Can we trust it? Is it what it says it is? Well, if we just apply the basic fundamentals of, is it decentral? Yes, it's decentral. Is it for the people? Yes, it's lunar, it's nocturnal, it's for the people. Is it actually capable of delivering on the promise that it yes, I think so. This chart is the team in charge of this chart is all in really good shape. There's nothing here that's particularly worrisome. Venus in the 8th house is slightly worrisome. Mars in the 6th. You know, it's funny. The 6th and the 8th are both. They have a bad reputation because they're in aversion to the ascendant. They're. It's hard to see. It's like trying to see right around a corner. If something is, you know, straight across from you, you could see it, right? It may be opposed to you, but you could see it coming. If it's straight across from you and just around the corner, yeah, is it running away? Is it coming to get me? Is it lying in wait for me, or is it trying to get away? I can't tell. So you know, it's difficult that way. There's somewhat of an occluded quality there. The moon in the 9th house is very positive, and in fact, you know, it's very indicative of the extreme intelligence that it takes to invent something like this and to understand it. And that's another reason why I didn't get into crypto for the longest. Someone was like, man, you know, myself, I'm like a basically what you would call a you know, there's a Lemurian. You know, I'm an Earth. I'm a country boy. I'm a you know, Mother Nature. You know, is my domain, and I don't get all this. I don't even have a smartphone, man. You know, and I was like, I don't want that thing beeping at me all the time. It's a pain in the ass. So yeah, I just didn't. I was like, that's not for me. Like that's Atlantean. So I like let the Atlanteans do the Atlantean stuff, right? But so the moon in the 9th house reflects that. Like, you know, this is most of these cryptos were founded by people who, if they had stayed with the dominant system, they would have been PhD, you know, level, like whatever. But they are not. They're countercultural people. So they're the highly educated countercultural people. Which is really interesting, you know. So by house, maybe not so much the nocturnal team. Well, not as much. By essential dignity, they're banging. By accidental dignity, not as much. Moon and Mars in particular, those houses are not great houses. Mercury and the moon are in good houses. Mercury's angular. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we're going to talk about, even though the moon is the almutin of the figure, she rules the sphere of Yesod, which is like, again, it's like, are you being, are you falling prey to an illusion here? It's a very real concern. But actually with Mercury is the sphere of Hod, which is like, no, like we're going to actually trust what the data tells us. We're going to divorce ourselves from what we want to be true or what we think might or could be true. We're going to let that inspire us to look further than some people might, right? That's the beauty of Yesod, is that it inspires us, our imaginations. What if this were true? Well, let's see if it actually could be. That's the Mercury sphere. And Mercury is very powerful in this chart. And Mercury, by goodness, is the god of coins, right? A coin purse, it's a mode of exchange. You're constantly taking stuff out, putting stuff in. Oh, this idea of exchange, it's completely the domain of Mercury. Get out of your head that Venus is the goddess of currency. It's not. Venus is the goddess of value. Value in the terms of, ooh, that's sexy, or ooh, I want that. You see, money, it's in and of itself, it's dirty. I mean, if you're a cashier, you got to wash your hands constantly. Money is not sexy, it's dirty. It's what you can get with money that is sexy, right? So the sexy quality comes from when you spend the money. The money itself, it's mercurial, it's a medium of exchange. So Mercury is the god of exchange. Mercury is the god of coins. And I'm telling you, we're going to have to do a whole class on Mercury in this chart, but suffice it to say for now, being angular, Mercury is in a very good place. In fact, the best place of any planet in this chart, because it's the only planet that's angular. It's in an angular house, and it's also conjunct the descendant. So overall, the nocturnal team is very much capable and also has the accidental dignity to actually get it done. And so I think that Bitcoin is here to stay, and I think it is what it says it is. And I think that it's that the and here's the thing, people say, well, it's a store of value, it's like digital gold. Well, yes, but that's not all it is. What really got me to want to get turned on to crypto is when I heard people start talking about Web 3.0. Now, this is really fascinating, because this is when I was sold. It's like, okay, this is something that I want to get on board with, right? Because right now we live in a time in what's called a great mutation, right? We're in the turning of the ages between when the great conjunctions between Jupiter and Saturn, they were happening in the earth signs, and now they're happening in the air signs. The first round of air conjunctions happened in 1980 in the sign of Libra, specifically in the first decan of Libra, which is the Two of Swords, by the way, and it's ruled by the moon. And so there's a yes-odd character to that energy. It's also ruled by Saturn. So you have that sort of justice-looking figure with the crossed swords, right? But it's blindfolded, and there's a moon in the picture, right? But then what happens? The internet is born in the next 20 years. The internet's born, okay? So that's Web 1.0. Web 1.0 is like this static thing where, you can go on, like people who really know computers, they have these websites, and you can go on there and you can see what's on there, and you can do limited amount of stuff. And then Web 2.0 is after the next Jupiter and Saturn conjunction, which happened again in Earth. So this is when the powers that be, the central authorities and all these money grubbers got a hold of the internet, monetization of the internet, right? Web 2.0 is when you get, Facebook and, Google and all these people, they get their dirty claws, their hooks into it, centralize it, and make it about, being these behemoth things that control it and profit and, profit off of all the data and all this stuff, right? So it's very easy to see. You had great conjunction in Libra, Web 1.0, great conjunction in Taurus, Web 2.0, great conjunction in Aquarius, Web 3.0. Web 3.0 is the blockchain version of the web. It's decentralized. It's and it's going to take the power of AI to harvest the power of the data, and then not give it to these greedy, behemoths to make them rich, but give it back to the people to empower everyone, so that you and I, in our daily routines, we can benefit from the power of this AI-driven data, and say, oh, the data says, this particular way is the way to go, right? And we don't need to we don't even need to be Atlantean. I can be a Lemurian and just hit the button and say, okay, the data is telling me this. So I can have a way to say, okay, here I am in Yesod. I know what I want to be true. I know what I imagine could be true, but is the data supporting that? You see, now we can have the Hode informing the Yesod. This is a good thing. And so I think that's when I really was like, okay, that I can get on board with. That sounds like something that I want to be a promoter of, and that I think could be actually good for the world. And I'm not even going to say Aquarius age because I don't even go there. Like, I think we're in the age of the flying horse. If you want to go by that reckoning, if you want to do precession, the stars of Pegasus are the ones closest to the vernal point. But what I really think we're in the age of is the age of, we're leaving the ion of Leo and we're moving into the ion of Sagittarius. And that's a whole nother talk. I recently gave that talk for the ESAR community. And it's because the great conjunctions there were happening. The first one in the fire signs was happening in Leo for like a very long time. And now they're happening in Sagittarius. So I'm not even going to say that this is part of an age of Aquarius but it's certainly a part of the great mutation into air. And this whole Web 3.0 thing, I think it's going to happen. And I think it's like, so basically we're at the point of like, in the 80s or the 90s where it's like, if you go ahead and get on board with this thing, it's like getting your surfboard, you're out in the ocean and get on your surfboard and start paddling, because when that wave comes, if you can the wave will take you, right? If you're still trying to get out to the wave, or if you could get knocked over by the wave. And so that's my sense of it, is that yes, this thing is very powerful and capable to do what it says it wants to do, and that it's probably going to be, it's funny because before I was even into crypto, I gave a forecast for Astrology Hub in 2020, actually, right around the Great Conjunction. And I said, look, the internet again, and I didn't even know about this Web 3.0 or crypto at the time, but I was saying the same thing because I already felt what I was just laying out for you. The internet was discovered after this Great Conjunction in Libra. Then we had this, this Earth sign thing, and like everybody made money off of it, kind of pimped it or hoarded out, whatever you want. And now, and I said, I think we haven't even discovered the true power of the internet. Like we don't even have the clue how powerful the internet could be yet. And we're going to find out after the great conjunctions get back into the air signs and are there to stay, because at that point, it's going to be a new energy. It's not going to be this thing dipping back into the earth, you see. So, and then when I found out about Web 3.0, I was like, yes, that's what I was feeling. That's what I was intuiting could be true. You see, at the Yi side level, I felt it to be true. And then I found the data to support that. And I was like, yeah, I think this is the real thing, And I'm going to tell you, when you start dialing in, one of the things on the Yi side level, it's interesting. Remember how I said this chart is driven by the moon? That the moon is the Almuten and the guardian angel comes from the lunar sphere. The simplest thing, the most simple tool I ever learned. I learned this, I think the first year I was studying astrology. I learned my chart. I knew how to cast the chart. I knew how to follow the transits. And so this woman said, Gary, what you need to do is you need to follow the new moon and the full moon. And you need to understand that there'll be a new moon in each house every month. So you're planting the seeds of that new moon. And then 6 months later, there'll be a full moon in that house. And that's when you reap the harvest. So you just follow the new moon and the full moon around your chart. And that's how you'll learn. And I did that. And it was a great learning experience. And that's one of the very first things that I teach people. This chart is the same way. If you follow the new moons and full moons, it's so like right now, and it's interesting because it's a waxing moon in the natal chart, but by secondary progression, it's already gone into a waning moon. And for some reason, the full moon is like when you have the sell-offs, and so the price goes down. But then right after it goes down, of course, for the next fortnight, during the waning cycle, the price usually goes up. And during the waxing cycle, the price usually goes down. It's a very simple but powerful technique that I've seen people use. And it works because this chart is lunar, you see? But yeah, so, but oh man, when we get into the Mercury of this chart, oh my God, it's incredible because in fact, when I started analyzing this chart using the tools in my book, I realized like this thing was made, or my book was made for it. I mean, the chicken or the egg, I don't know. But I mean, it's incredible. All of the tools that I've developed in my study of Mercury, this chart has them all. It's incredible. So stay tuned for the next edition where we're going to dive into specifically Mercury in the chart of Bitcoin, now that we've covered the outline of it. Oh, for Pete's sakes, before I leave, of course, Saturn opposite Uranus. We can't forget to talk about that, right? Saturn, this thing was born at a time when Saturn was opposed Uranus. And so that is revolutionary. And, you know, I remember, it's funny because I remember, I'm just going to close the door here real quick. I remember, you know, at the time, I was ready for a revolution, you know. I was really tired of a lot of things that were going on in the world. And I was like, bring on the revolution, you know, let's go, man. And I remember I went down to an Occupy meeting or whatever. And these people were doing hand signals and stuff. And I was like, man, I'm ready to mess some stuff up, yo. Like, I don't know what you guys are doing with hand signals, but it's not for me. And the Occupy thing didn't last, but this did, you know. But anyway, my point being that Jupiter and Uranus were conjunct the vernal point not long after this, right? 0 Aries, this whole thing. I remember thinking at the time, man, like what a disappointment. Like seriously, like we have these epic transits and all we get is this shit. Like you got to be kidding me. I really thought there would be some great technological advancement, you know. Well, there was, but check it out. This chart is nocturnal. And oh, here's another thing. If we look at, if we go back here, remember the lot of the moon, fortune is in Taurus. Well, notice that if we make Taurus the first house, notice that the moon is in the 12th house from fortune. So it's hidden. So Bitcoin stayed under the radar for the first 12 years or so. Well, 2017, it kind of came out of the closet, but still wasn't quite enough to really get the regulators quite going. But, you know, for at least, what, 7 years, it stayed under the radar. And that was a good thing because, you know, it could have been squashed, but it wasn't. So yeah, the Saturn Uranus thing, and then now we're in the Saturn Uranus squares, right? And so they're trying to do what they can to limit it and to regulate it and all this stuff. But I don't think that they're going to be able to do. They're not going to be able to stop it. And so yeah, there really is a revolution going on, and I think that we maybe even don't even have a clue just how profound the possibilities are. I think maybe the people that are super into crypto have a clue. I think maybe I'm starting to get a part of a clue. Most people, I think, don't have a clue how incredibly game-changing this technology could be. But yeah, that's what the chart seems to back that up. So it's exciting. And like I said, it gets even more exciting when we bring Mercury into the picture. So be sure to tune in for the next installment of the Astrology of Bitcoin series on Hermetic Astrology podcast. And hopefully, you know, if you're not into crypto, you know, it's not for everybody. I mean, even some revolutions, like some people just go on the way they were before, right? Like, that's cool. I get it. You don't have to be into crypto. I'm not saying, you know, you're stupid or crazy or whatever. If it's not your thing, it's not your thing. But maybe you still learned something about how to read charts from this exercise. So hopefully it was of value either way. So thanks for tuning in. And remember to check me out at dreamastrologer.com. You can find me on Facebook. let's see. I don't have anything else coming up anytime. Oh, I'm going to be giving a workshop for the Michigan chapter of NCGR. So be sure if you want to find out, it's a workshop on the Venus-Mars cycle. This is, and I've done some really in-depth work with the Venus-Mars cycle, which is really, really cutting edge. And so if you want to find out about that, make sure you're on my mailing list, because I'm doing that next month. And I'm going to, it's a Zoom thing. So anybody from for years I was traveling around to these different chapters, and I would just meet with the people of that area, right? But now you take advantage of all those contacts I made, but I can meet with people from all over the world, even at these local chapters, which is pretty cool. And I really dig supporting these local chapters, because I feel like having a local presence is important. That's how a lot of people get started, maybe not so much in this day and age, but I enjoy supporting the local chapters, and it's a good thing. People can still get access to good material that way. So be on the lookout for that as well. And I'm going to be on Monday. I'm going to be talking with my friend Shireen Shostak, Shireen Vismaya. We're going to talk about, she made a post the other day on Facebook about the lunar north node, aka Rahu, entering the nakshatra of Kritika, the Kachers. This is the lunar mansion containing the Pleiades. And I was like, Shireen, like there's a couple things from the Western tradition that back up what you're saying. And she's like, oh, wow. So we started talking, and I was like, let's do a podcast. And while we're at it, let's talk about Venus and Mars and their mutual reception. Or a lot of people are taking a big, nasty, talking crap about that. And I want to look, let's mitigate that a little bit. So we're actually going to talk about the positive side of Venus and Scorpio and Mars and Libra. And what else? There was one other thing. Mercury stationing on Chitra, Spica, the 0 Libra star in the Vedic system. So be sure to tune in for that as well. All right, so see you next time. See you around. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.